Well, welcome everybody. It's so nice to see all of you. This is Common Time, our monthly series from the CDSS. This month, we have a collaboration with Contra Pulse, our music interview podcast with Julie Vallimont. And it's really wonderful and exciting to see you all here. A couple of housekeeping notes for you. We are recording this meeting and we'll be posting it later, probably on YouTube. So turn off your video if you don't want to be seen. And please remain muted through the entire presentation. There are live captions for this video. You can turn them on or off by clicking the closed caption symbol that says live transcript at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Crispin Youngberg and Joanna Wilkinson are also on from CDSS, so feel free to send either of them a chat message if you're having technical difficulties, or just put it in the chat and we'll see what we can do to help you. You should get an email in the next day or so that has a survey, so keep an eye out for that. We really appreciate if you fill that out and send it back. And then we'll also have time for questions at the end, so as they come to you, feel free to just put them in the chat, and I'll be compiling those and sending them to Julie as we go, so just drop them in there and we'll have some questions at the end. So without further ado, let me first introduce Julie Vallimont, who I've had the pleasure of working with over the past nearly 2 years, it turns out, creating the Contra Pulse podcast. Julie's a fantastic pianist and accordionist, and she's played with bands like Nor'easter and Buddy System all over the country and beyond. And she's passionate about the amazing diversity of contradance music and playing piano, and has been diving into what that is and how it intersects with the communities we build in her interviews over the past couple of years. So take it away, Julie.
Thanks, Ben. And I just want to say thank you to CDSS for making this possible. You know, I approached them with this project idea about 5 years ago, at least, and it morphed into various forms. And because of COVID, it turned into a podcast. And it's just been a wonderful opportunity to talk with a lot of folks and hear your stories and experience. So thank you, CDSS, for having us here as part of Common Time as well. Well, I don't want to talk because we have some cool things to hear from our illustrious panelists. So tonight we have with us Becky Tracy, Kate Barnes, Pete Sutherland, and Rodney Miller. And I think most of them do not need any introduction to most of you. But I'll tell you a little bit about them from their bio. And I will also say that Kate, Rodney, and Pete have all been interviewed on past Contra Pulse episodes, and Becky has an interview kind of in the works. So if you want to hear more about each of them and have more chance for them to talk and hear more about their background and projects, you can check out those interviews on all your podcast software and the CDSS website. We thought of this project because as I was doing interviews with folks on Contra Pulse, some themes started to emerge. And that's partly the purpose of the podcast, is just to kind of collect thoughts and perspectives and experiences and kind of take a snapshot, like take the pulse of contradance music as it is. And it ended up being kind of frozen in time in a sense because of COVID, which I hadn't planned when I started this project. And so I wanted to explore today the theme of mentoring and teaching and learning, because one of the things I love about this tradition is how welcoming it is to people. And there's a lot of different ways to learn it and pass it on. And I feel like these musicians are conduits. These tunes, some of them have been around for hundreds of years, passing through person to person to person, and they change as they go. And each of them is interpreted in a different way by the personality of whoever is playing them in the moment. And so tonight, I'm hoping that we'll talk about things like how did each of our panelists learn, and where did they get started, and what inspired them, and how they're teaching new musicians. I will just have one fangirl moment that all of you, Becky, Kate, Pete, and Rodney were all huge inspirations for me. And so if I play for contra dances, it's your fault. I spent a long time in dance halls dancing to you, listening to you, sitting backstage, and you've all been so welcoming and gracious over the years, just being friendly, sharing tips, talking shop, sharing tunes, and it's just been so wonderful. So let me tell you a little bit about Kate Barnes, who recently just won a nice award. thanks to CDSS. And she has been performing on piano, flute, guitar, and about a billion other things for contra dancing and English country dancing for decades. She plays with Bare Necessities and the Latter-day Lizards. She's the author of beloved dance books for English country dance and couples dancing. Over 70 recordings, Kate. That's a lot of time in the studio.
I know.
And has played for thousands and thousands of dances in the order of the tens of thousands of dances. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you. Honored to be here.
Would you be able to tell us a little bit about kind of how you got hooked into playing for dance music and what some of your like seminal moments were that kind of got you started in this?
Well, I think I always had a bent to this kind of music because when I was in high school, before I ever heard of contra dance music, I did some composing, and I was basically composing polkas. Something about that rhythm and the simpler melodies just grabbed me. So I was kind of primed already in that direction of enjoying this kind of particular structured 32 bar repeated A's, repeated B's music. Now, so in college, the first year, after the first year, I went to a contra dance to meet a friend of mine. He never showed up, but I stayed to dance anyway. And I have a theory that if you can get someone to go to a dance twice, you'll have them hooked. So I went once, wasn't hooked, but then my friend said, sorry, I forgot, I'll come next week. So I went the next week, and then I got hooked onto it. At that time, I also bought a flute, just for the hell of it, at a pawn shop in Cambridge. And I started playing these tunes on the flute. And also, I looked at what the pianists were doing. I think it was Janet Paoletti and Bob McQuillan at that point. We were going to Fitzwilliam, New Hampshire, and I thought, I think I can do that. And so I wrote anyone who could play any kind of melody instrument. We took out Cole fiddle tunes, and then I would back them up until they couldn't stand it anymore. And that's basically my start. But the biggest nudge towards actually playing was I was at the Fitzwilliam dance playing the flute on the side, and McQuillan, who was on stage with Roger Pinard, the fiddler, and Janet Paoletti on piano, looked at me and shouts, as McQuillan only could, across the hall, said, "You, get up here!" So I was petrified, clutching my flute. I came on stage, and he slammed his hand on his accordion box next to his chair and said, "Sit here and play." It was great. It was fantastic, and it's been downhill or maybe uphill ever since then.
And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, I played some on the piano for during the breaks because they had a pianist. And Jim Kennedy, who ran the Fitzwilliam dance, said, "Hey, I think we can work you into the hiring schedule." So that was kind of my first professional contra gig, is the Fitzwilliam dance during the summers.
That's amazing. Just that moment. I love that story. Hey, sit down and play.
I know, it's so Bob.
That's so great. Well, more about that. But let's say hi to Becky Tracy here. Becky, you all know her distinctive, beautiful fiddle playing, which has been a defining presence in some of the most popular and innovative dance bands to come out of New England. You know, Wild Asparagus, Nightingale. You know, her playing draws on French Canadian and Irish and other New England styles, and it's grounded in her upbringing in the dance scene of New England. Welcome, Becky. I'm so glad to have you here.
It's delightful to be here. Thank you.
How did you end up getting roped into playing for dance music and making it part of your life's work?
So without knowing it, I kind of got brainwashed into this whole scene as a child, because my dad was a caller for community dances. And so I would go off to Girl Scout dances and, you know, just all kinds of little dances with my dad. And and he would call. Sometimes my mom would help him, and sometimes he had a band, and Bill Welling and Bill Wallach were occasionally that band in Connecticut. But he also brought records like so many of those colors did. And so I actually listened to a lot of Don Messer and the Ralph Page Orchestra, and I had no idea who I was listening to. I just kind of grew up dancing to that music. And it wasn't until I did contra dance. I went out to a few contra dances here and there. Through college, I went to a few up like in Etna, New Hampshire. But it wasn't until I moved to Maine and went out to a contra dance, and Michael Connolly danced with me, and he somehow asked me if I played an instrument. And I said, well, I made the mistake. At the time, I thought it was the mistake because it was the end of my dancing for the most part. He said, do you play? And I said, I play the violin. And he said, well, and he started to drag me to all these sessions, and I started having the best time. You know, he brought me to a lot of Irish sessions and maybe sit in with bands and helped me find people to play with. And then when I moved to Vermont, there were more people to play with there. Great musicians. Walter Weber was a big influence in a band there that I joined called the Bog Carrots, of all names. And it just kept going. As I moved, people were they would, you know, kind of bring you in and teach you what they knew. And it was kind of, you know, as we know, it's a warm, welcoming community. So that's the gist of it.
That's wonderful. Where in Maine were you living?
I was in Portland, Maine.
In Portland. Yeah. Maine was the place where I went to my first contra dance, and I got hooked on it because they were so welcoming. It's just such a great community there.
Was your first contra dance Bodenham, or was it a different one?
It was the North Yarmouth dance at the West Custago Hall.
The one that burned.
Yeah. And it was just magic. And I don't think I would have gone back to contra dancing if it hadn't been the energy of the people in the room and their friendliness that pulled me back in. Because I certainly wasn't good at the activity in the beginning. I found it very overwhelming. But I was like, whoa, this is so great. And you just feel that energy. So that's just really lovely. Well, we'll come back to that as well. We have Pete Sutherland with us tonight, Vermont musical legend. Both an accomplished instrumentalist and a singer-songwriter or songsmith. Pete plays fiddle, piano, banjo, melodica, 800 things I don't know about for contra dancing, and he's been doing this for decades, both as a founding member of the Clayfoot Strutters and a veteran of many groups, including Metamora, and now with his current contraband, Pete's Posse, which is just a musical adventure on wheels. Pete's also been an artistic director, a producer, and a mentor for several folks like Young Tradition Vermont and other groups. Pete, how did you end up playing for dances?
Well, up here I'm from Burlington originally. There had been contra dancing in the previous generation. I didn't grow up with any of this. My dad was not a caller, and so I got all the way to college without actually hearing any of this music. And then this was like right around the Kent State era and stuff like that. And then all these kind of like kids with backpacks and mandolins in tow started kind of like roaming the halls of the university, and it was just like this sort of inkling that there was this whole thing going on that I hadn't necessarily heard about all the time. I was listening to Led Zeppelin or whatever. So I at that point I had gotten a banjo, and then I got a fiddle, and I was scratching away and fell in with enough people that kind of like thought that they knew how to sort of like keep a beat to play for some really simple, not contra at that time, square dancing actually, but just a few years later, and so we were trying to make something happen in the northern Vermont area. This is before you got up here, Becky, because I wasn't actually around here when you got here. But so we kind of didn't cross paths there. But so we tried to invent things from the ground up as best we could from like, you know, reading about them, or somebody said, hey, I went to a Dudley dance, you know, like 3 years ago, and then they try to like, everybody was like stone soup. Everybody brought a piece of it, and so we were trying to make that happen. Meanwhile, then I got really out of college. I got really interested in being a migrant hippie apple picker, and was working down in Brattleboro for a while. And we several times after working 10 and 11-hour days piled in the car with a peanut butter sandwich and went off to a Dudley dance, and it was the classic 6-person powerhouse version of the Canterbury Orchestra. So it was just an electrifying experience, and you know, just sweat just like rolling off of everybody, and so that was really visceral. And at that time, I was really much more interested in playing old time music. It's like the first language that really bit me in the butt, and so I took my apple picking ventures down south so I could visit old fiddlers down there and stuff, and there was certainly no contra dancing in Asheville or anywhere else at that time. We're talking like the mid '70s. It's pretty sleepy still, and I was working down there, and I was like, you know, falling in with these, you know, really, you know, ne'er-do-well, you know, back to the lander types down there that were just living for playing old time music, and not only playing it, but like being reenactors of it. And there's no really better word for it. And so, you know, like I just, for a nice Yankee boy, ended up in some incredibly like crazy and stressful and probably downright dangerous situations pursuing this music, and, you know, like puking my guts out on the lawn of somebody I just bought some moonshine from, and, you know, it's so far from like the niceties of an English country dance. Yeah, I mean, but that to me was like I really needed, you know, like a complete jump start, you know, in having not heard this music and having tried my hand at other things. So it was really great. I mean, but, you know, I mean, I'm not here to preserve cultural stereotypes, but some of the people I was hanging out with really kind of would make the Beverly Hillbillies look like the Kardashians. I mean, they were like incredibly, yeah, you knew you were in North Carolina in the mountains. So I came home with that kind of like experience, and then contradicting all of a sudden was happening. So then I kind of like, you know, broadened my musical palette, which was, I was interested in other stuff anyway, and it just kind of step by step from there. So.
Sounds like an immersive experience, to say the least, Pete.
Yeah.
I heard that in the early days you were also a caller.
I tried my hand at that. You know, I think everybody was kind of into the DIY thing, because we had no living tradition. So we were just really trying to get something going, and everyone was trying everything. And probably that's why I cultivated being a multi-instrumentalist as well. But I could still call it a wedding, you know, I could do that. You know, what do you need to know? You don't need that much.
Well, I have so many questions for all of you, but I want to get to Rodney, and then we will delve into all these things in more depth. And our last panelist tonight is Rodney Miller, fiddler, violin maker, tunesmith. He's renowned for his New England style fiddling and his unique fiddle style and compositions. From the New England Chestnuts albums to Air Playing, Air Dance, to the String Rays, and many more, Rodney's playing showcases both tradition and innovation. He's been playing dances for more than 40 years on both coasts and everywhere in between and abroad, and has been recognized as a master fiddler. Thank you for joining us tonight, Rodney.
Nice to be here, Julie.
So how did you get started playing in New England for contra dances?
Well, I started because of my grandfather's violin was handed to me at age 7. My mother was a professional musician, a piano and organ player. My dad was a minister, so we moved quite a bit. But I grew up mostly in upstate New York near Rochester. And my mom was born in Glens Falls and lived in Bluemont, West Virginia for a while. And both grandfathers played violin. And I used to take my dad's father's violin and go play for him before my grandfather, before he died in the late 60s, I guess. So I came into it. There was an Irish, popular Irish tune book on the piano, and I started playing tunes out of that book with my mom, and I realized innately that there was an ancestral history of music, and my dad grew up near Syracuse, and he told me about square dances that he used to go to as a boy. Anyway, there was this sort of collective folk mentality in the family, and we would go to fiddlers' picnics in Canandaigua, like on a Sunday afternoon, and it really piqued my interest in playing more tunes. So I was getting training with some lessons how to play, and back then it wasn't known that if you were left-handed you would play right-handed. That was assumed, that I didn't get left-handed training because I am left-handed. So I always see the world in a kind of a reversal way that's set up for righties. And I managed to play enough fiddle music and work through my right hand awkwardness of bowing, because my coordination was in my left hand. But it took probably a decade of playing for dances to smooth out my bowing arm. And as I was doing that, then I was creating my own sort of bowing style, a lot of lifting off the strings and stuff. So I was, because of the fiddler's picnic situation, I was eager to learn some of the basic repertoire from the old-time fiddlers associations. So I looked up local fiddlers like in West Walworth, New York, outside of Rochester, and went to visit Wayne Merrill, who used to be a Adirondack lumberjack at the turn of the century in 1900. And he played some tunes for me, and I played along with him. And then I did a collecting trip to Vermont, to Barre, Vermont. I met Clem Myers, head of the Northeast Fiddlers Association, and he put me in touch with Neil Converse up in Plainfield. So I went to visit him and recorded him on a tape-to-tape recorder, and learned Green Mountain Petronella and a bunch of other stuff that I was beginning to play for contra dances. But let me get back. I was recruited to go to Oberlin College to be in a string band, actually. That was the main reason I went. And they needed a fiddler. The fiddler had left as I was coming in as a freshman. And so I started playing with the string band at college. And that led me to know Jane Wilk, who was a sophomore. I was a freshman, and she wanted to do square dancing and contra at college. And she needed a fiddler, so she recruited me. I started playing for dances then as a freshman. And she had grown up with a family, the Wilks from New York City, who'd gone to the Pine Woods camp in the 50s and 60s. And she had grown up with this stuff. And she just begged me to go to Pine Woods. She said, "They're going to love you. You're going to love it." So I applied it on scholarship and washed dishes, I think in 70, 71, the summer of. And met May Gadd and she played drums on the stage, and a bunch of others. But I also met Dudley Lofman, and he immediately hired me to come up and play his summer schedule of contra dances in New Hampshire. And I sort of morphed into moving to New Hampshire at that point. So I traveled around with Dudley for a summer, and that led to more dance opportunities with my brother Randy playing piano. And we started playing the Nelson dance as regulars, replacing Newt Tolman and Kay Gilbert. Anyway, it got me into playing for dances, and it's been nonstop since then.
Wow. What a story. It's like when we look at all these different stories of how people end up playing country music, some of us are born into it and some of us are not and just kind of randomly encounter it in life. Some people are kind of pushed into it, like, hey, like I was at a party and the piano player got up and left and someone said, you play piano? And I said, not this kind of music. Sit down, go boom, go chuck. Here's some chords. Like we all have these different stories of how we get pulled into it, but there's often like this one person who's like a mentor or a friend or a partner or someone who brings us into it. And then there's all these places that are like incubators that we don't know about. Like when you're a dancer and you go to like a dance at a hall, you don't realize that there's this whole deep rooted network of places where musicians can meet each other, like pine woods, and a lot of people get introduced to dance music at places like Ashokan or Maine Fiddle Camp. And so these camps are really important places for people to go and get immersed in things. So I would just love to hear a little bit about, or just, talk about how these mentors influenced you, and like if there's for each of you like a moment or like a really important thing you learned from one of your mentors, or like a turning point when you realized you were going to become a dance musician. And I'm also curious, like these names that pop up over and over again, like Dudley or Bob McQuillan, who were their mentors? Because we're all here roughly the same time era, but who were they learning from, and how did they, we do have an interview with Dudley Lofman, the very first episode of Contra Pulse, which you can go back and listen to. Because like you say, Pete, there's also the question of some of us, we're just inventing things as we go, and the traditions have restarted all over the country and kind of make it up as we go as well. So I'm going to stop talking now. And if any of you want to jump in and share one of those formative mentoring experiences, I'd love to hear about it. I'm not used to interviewing 4 people at once. I don't know how to start. Raise your hand. Pete, you're smiling.
Well,
do you have thoughts about this?
Yeah, sure. I mean, yeah, dead air is a terrible thing.
Thank you. Please rescue me.
So I'm not sure that in contra dancing I had any direct mentoring, but I've sort of said that as mentoring for me in old age has become like a super powerful and important thing. I think any mentoring that I received is going to necessarily feel really different and possibly be just like not as visceral a sort of a thing when I think about it as a factor in there. I think it was more like immersion. That word got used already. I feel like I was just willing to just dive in and immerse myself in this entire other way of moving as a community, through the work week and the weekend, and finding all these other people to whom this was just this passionate thing, and everybody was smiling all the time, because like, hey, we've got something cool going on here. So that to me is different. But I will say that I had, as far as learning tunes, I've had at different times I've had mentors, and one that I talk about a lot because I was just so amazingly fortunate to live about a half mile from him was Louis Baudouin, the Franco-American fiddler, from a, kind of like a second generation immigrant from a small town up by the St. Lawrence. And his whole clan ended up here via Lowell, Mass, the mill community there that Jack Kerouac was also, his family was there as well at the same time. But there's a funny thought, Jack Kerouac and Louis Baudouin. But anyway, so the Baudouins ended up in Burlington, and I was just out of college, and I'm like, people are like, hey, there's this guy that plays pretty cool what we call French Canadian tunes at that point, and so go over there, and that was amazing, because as we can all testify from some experience, it's the fact that the mentor is unbelievably generous and welcoming that kind of really seals the deal. Way more important than tunes. That's my piece.
Oh, dead air.
Yeah, I was just about to. I'm going to call on you if you don't.
Oh,
start
maybe we should
talking.
call next. How about you, Kate?
Yeah, you get to tag the next person when you're done talking. Yeah,
Yeah.
Kate, what do you think about this?
This kind of reminds me. I go doing this college interview, and the interviewer said, "So, tell me about yourself." And that kind of broad, unfocused, general question scares the hell out of me.
Right?
Can you give me something more specific?
Now I forgot what the question was.
It's about mentors and the
Yes.
and if there was a sort of defining moment that kind of propelled you into. It sounded like you actually kind of covered this, Kate, earlier.
But,
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I had people who influenced my style immensely. I started with McQuillan's very basic style, and I have to say, I got hired by Donna Hines at the time, to play at the Fitzwilliam dance on the piano. And then we went on to play the Brim May dance down in Boston. And Tony Parks and I swapped the piano every other week on that gig. And I learned so much about great piano playing from Tony Parks. Now, he's certainly very generous with his style. Is he a mentor? I don't know. But I learned a lot from him for sure.
Right. Yeah, I feel like each band that I went through, there was always somebody that I was learning from, as time went on. There were the initial bands in Maine where I had the tunes in my head and I was able to learn by ear, but I didn't really know what I was doing playing for dancing. And then there was the band in the greater Burlington area, the Bog Carrots, with Walter and Jim Search and a few other people. But Walter was this beautiful player, and I absorbed his just so much. But at the time, part of your question, Julie, was about propelling into this. When did I become a dance musician? Like, I was playing for dances and it was a blast, but I was also teaching math in the local public school, which a lot of people have done over the years. They've had these lives that have been, sort of two pieces. It's like Louis Baudouin. He didn't play the fiddle all the time. That wasn't the thing. He had a job and then he played the fiddle on the outside. But the propelling moment was just, I would go to I would go down to Augusta in the summer. I was learning from Brendan Mulvihill and Eugene O'Donnell down there. And I was just playing more and more in the summer and just doing that immersive thing that so many people are doing now with all the camps. And I would get back to the school year and realize I couldn't do that thing that other people do in the way I wanted to. Like, I was, having such a great time playing the fiddle. But to be a math teacher, of young kids, it's all consuming and you can't really do both. So I decided to take a year off and see what happened. And in that year, I met the boys with Nightingale, and Wild Asparagus decided to audition me, and I managed to stay with all those people, those good people, for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Sometimes all it takes is those chance meetings, or, your life goes in a slightly different direction and then there you are. I'm glad you stopped teaching math.
Well, at the time I thought, I can do this again. If I'm going to do something new, this is the time. And I love teaching math. I still love teaching. So could happen again. I'm surprised it hasn't happened yet in COVID, but it hasn't.
Do you have anything you want to add to this, Rodney? Putting you on the spot here.
Sure. There have been several mentors. Early on, I was traveling some down to like the Pipe Stem Fiddle Festival in West Virginia, and also to Union Grove, just to be around more of the music. And I met, at Pipe Stem, I met Franklin George, a fiddler from West Virginia, and he actually taught me the Salamone Waltz that we recorded on Airplaying album. Great waltz. And he pointed out to me that there were a number of fiddle tunes that a lot of the Southern players play that are actually sound like they're directly out of the Northern tradition of playing, like the Irish and the Scottish styles. And so that sort of like tied it in for me that it was a broad area of music that translated to all different areas of the United States. Another mentor early on was Alan Block, and I remember on a camping trip that my parents loved to go camping to Lake Dunsmore, Vermont, and there happened to be a fiddle convention up in Thetford Center, and we went to that, and I saw that Alan Block was playing. I listened to him, and I had his album, The Old Time String Band Project, on Elektra, I think, and I took the album. I had it with me because I don't know why on a camping trip I just took fiddle music with me, and so I ran up to him in the parking lot and had him sign my album. But he was influential, and great style of playing with his foot movement and his knees and his sandals. But then it was probably the most important mentor for my playing was through Ralph Page. So I used to travel with McQuillan and Ralph Page to play for dances down in Concord, Mass. And around. And we would travel together, and I would first go to Ralph's house on Washington Street in Keene, New Hampshire. And then McQuillan would drive in with his Jeep and drive all of us, the three of us, down to the dance. And so I had time with Ralph in his parlor when he wasn't smoking a cigar. He would tell me stories about the camp that he ran. And he had hired Johnny Carignon to come down from Canada to play at his camp. And he was just absolutely raving about how John Carignon would play Money Musk, like never the same way twice, like 8, 10 times. It would be all different. So Ralph was presenting to me like, go for it, you young fiddler, do something with it. And so when I recorded Money Musk for the New England Chestnuts album, I came up with a version that went from the key of G to key of A. Now, nobody that I know of plays Money Musk in the key of G, but I thought it would make a nice key switch. And I worked out all kinds of variations, and that was directly related to being influenced by Ralph and McQuillan for writing tunes and all that stuff. So anyway.
I think it's easy for us who are learning to get kind of caught up in like how it used to be done, as if there's like a crystallized tradition that is like the right way. And you know, when you hear stories about some of the folks that some of us never got to meet, you know, a lot of them were pretty flexible and experimental and interested in trying new things. And you know, it's just like when I first met Bob McQuillan, I lurked around him for years just watching him because I was too afraid to talk to him. And then I came up and asked him if I could have lessons. He's like, I don't give lessons. But then I found out he was just joking, and he gave me his card and invited me to chat. But you know, he liked all the new things that were happening, I think. And so one of my questions for all of you, like as you learned and began playing, you all ended up innovating contra music that we have now. Like it has flourished in the last decades, different styles, formats, bands, people traveling all over the country. And what were you thinking about in terms of tradition? Like, were you not worried about it? Were you like, that's maybe not the right phrase, but what were your thoughts about tradition and what you were doing? And were you worried about whether it was quote traditional or not, or were you just going off in whatever direction you were inspired to go in?
I just have to bring up the Barnes rule of inverse geographical traditionalism, which states that the further you are away from the source of a tradition, the more conservative you are in playing it.
Yeah.
Yes, I believe that.
So it's like Irish musicians and the great seminal bands like the Balky Band, the Stockton Swing, Planxty. They were from Ireland, so they felt free to play around and innovate and add new things and syncopate and synthesizers, you name it. And here in the States, we're a little further away, and we kind of treated it with kid gloves. This was driven home for me when I played in Seattle once. I think I was with Rodney on this gig, and there was a local band, and they said, well, now we're going to play a New England tune. And it was so staid and so limp, I think. And I think that was that law in effect. So I think I've never had much, well, I don't want to say I haven't had much respect for tradition, but I think it's a canard to think that there was any one time where things were only done one way. I like to think that musicians always innovate. 300 years ago, 500 years ago, now. I'm sure, someone's sitting in Haydn's symphony said, geez, I wish I could play it this way, So I think innovation is constantly happening. And hopefully I can remain open to that.
I'm sure you can.
You think?
I think.
In my dotage?
Yeah.
You can't turn back now, Kate.
No. One of the first people who brought me into really playing for contra dancing was Ted Sanella. And what he did is he hired me for this gig in Texas. I had never really played professionally, and he brought me to Texas alone to play with all the musicians down there. And at the time, I just thought he was gonna, tell me sort of what I should do, like that I should be playing a certain tune for a certain dance. And it turned out that he was very open to having things tried out, and he would feed me tunes that he thought were really interesting from other bands. And it sort of opened the door of, okay, so this is this really well-respected, deep in the tradition caller who is saying, go ahead and try out stuff. And that was definitely a sense of freedom, that he gave us. It was good.
I think I was always, when I was starting out, I was gluing myself largely to, and this is on the fiddle, which is what I was really working hard at for a while, and then getting on to some other things, but really gluing myself to people who were more innovative. So no matter whether it was on the old time side or the Irish side or the Quebecois side, people that seemed to really have that going on, and were, it wasn't even like afraid, not afraid, or any other like emotional term. It was just like, that's the way they play. They do this thing where they don't always play the melody the same way, and whether it was scripted or not, it didn't really matter to me, because that just caught my ear so hard, and so I modeled on that. And then when I went off to play with some of my aforementioned rough and tumble old time brethren, at some parking lot, they'd be playing this very beautifully, but without a great degree of personal innovation in there. And then they would look at me like, what are you doing, bluegrass? What's going on there? Are you playing bluegrass? Because I was improvising. But it was true when I started listening to Irish music. Like, who caught my ear? It was people that were innovative. So it's been my model. It's like a group mentoring situation or something.
Mm-hmm.
What were you thinking in the early days of your tunes, Rodney, when you were making, albums like Airplaying and stuff? And I have a feeling some people maybe reacted to the sound of some of the things you were doing.
Well, one of the couple of the inspirations are one was from McQuillan writing his tune "Dancing Bear," which just sort of reached out and grabbed me. Like, oh man, that is such a cool tune. It is so like direct and simple, yet it has so much to say. And I just went wild with it. And another thing was Kate's tune "Fair Jenny," which we included on Airplaying as inspirational too. It had such a sort of a rock and roll to me. It was like Fairport Convention, and I wanted to play it that way. And it was an awesome addition. So some of my early tunes, like I'm thinking of Bluemont Waltz from 1986 on a dance tour to Bluemont, Virginia, and the setting in the town hall and the rolling Virginia hills inspired a tune the next day, having played in that location. So it has to do with emotion and feeling and response, sort of internalizing what you've just been through, and then it comes out because in our case, fiddle or music is our language. We're not super English speakers. I mean, I've always had trouble speaking, maybe because I have asthma, but I speak through my fiddle. So the fiddle has a lot to say from inside me. And the tunes just come up because I feel it. I was going to talk a little bit, if I can, about reaching out to the younger generation kind of thing. And an interesting event, maybe, is being worked on. This woman from England contacted me about a month ago, and she teaches grade or level 3 in Bristol, England, out on the West Coast. And she grew up as a Shetlander. And so she took originally fiddle lessons from Tom Anderson when she was a kid. And I was just remembering that about the same time period, in the aftermath of Airplane coming out, and Peter and Kate, but we were asked to go to Shetland as a duo, and we did in 85 or 6 or something in there. And I think she was exposed to Airplaying. Anyway, she had kept that in mind all these years. She stopped playing fiddle for a few years, and she's been a teacher, moved to England and married an Englishman. But she said the Airplaying and my fiddling has been so important to her in her life that she wanted to bring it into her classroom. So we're going to do a Zoom where I get up at 6:30 a.m. and Zoom to England for 30 7-year-olds. And so that's very cool, reaching out. And she keeps the music alive in her classroom. She said there are probably more English as second language kids there because it's a working community. But anyway, she just plays music throughout the day at the morning gatherings and art activities and all this stuff. She has background music and often plays the Airplaying album and other fiddle music. So she wanted to bring that to the kids because it's alive for them. And that's one of the things that's so important, is to make it alive in your world. Like when I was growing up, I had family support and promotion. And kids need peer groups of other kids playing music, I think, to make it ring true, especially in this day and age. With so much media stuff permeating their ears, that it's important to expose them to a wide range of stuff, including fiddle music.
Well, the peer group thing is so true. I mean, that's our whole thesis up here, and all the the organizations that we, and I think it's true down in Becky's Corner, and it's true in New Hampshire. There's so many places that I'm aware of now where there are pretty active year-round mentoring situations and opportunities for kids who are otherwise considered to be kind of weirdos and oddballs. I mean, we all are, but when you're a teenager, it's pretty, it's terrifying to be that. And if you happen to have an interest in some of this kind of music, to meet anybody else your age group, even if you didn't have that many other lifestyle choices or dress code or anything in common, you'd be like, oh my God, this is my people. So, that's enough fuel for a fire that's been burning, at least in my neighborhood up here, for like 20 years at this point.
Yeah. So it's like, how do we foster these kind of environments? Like going back, I'm sort of monitoring what people are writing in the chat as well. And, it's an interesting question about traditionalism and how that can really intimidate new folks, because I think a lot of folks who are new to Contra world often play other instruments, and they're used to maybe classical music where you have to, quote, do it right, which I feel like, programmed a lot of us. And then when I switched from classical music to traditional music, I was like, oh, I can do this however I want. And it takes a long time to unlearn that. And I think a lot of new musicians, they want the sheet music and they want to know exactly how it goes. And I think being flexible and welcoming, like you say, and just giving off this vibe of anything goes, it is a living tradition, like Katie says. And the way it's a living tradition is when you don't have to care about what you're doing and whether it's traditional or not, right? You could just do what you want. And I was interviewing Ben Smith yesterday, and we were talking about electronic Contra, which is not everybody's cup of tea, but he and I and others have had a lot of fun playing around with it. It's like a musical playground. And I asked him if he worried about what is traditional. And he's like, well, no, we know what Contra dance music sounds like, and this is something different. And as long as there's something still that exists that's fiddle tunes and good rhythm and it's danceable, why not play with the format, and why not experiment with what it could be like? We're not trying to replace anything with anything else. It's just one more flavor, right, that you can add to whatever you're doing. So I'm curious, what are the most important things that you think to teach your students when you're teaching? Also, someone is asking, like, well, then what is dance music, Contra dance music in this setting? If we can make it whatever we want, what are the most important essentials that make it still Contra dance music? And what do you think is most important to teach to new people? I won't say young people, because anyone of all ages can be new at this and play for dances.
I don't know what the perhaps the essence of in terms of what's the most important thing that I teach, but in terms of playing for dancing, I'm of course focused on people's rhythmic playing and trying to help them develop that. And that is it's a huge thing. So it may not even be obvious. Some of my students love Irish music, for example, and don't necessarily play it in a rhythmic way. And so, instilling rhythm into the music is something we work on all the time. And I actually remember, Kate, something from a workshop years and years and years ago that I took with you where you were saying it doesn't matter if you have the right chord or not, but you have to play it in time.
In fact, that's often a great way to discover new avenues of improvisation.
Right. And the other thing I learned from you, which is about improvisation, is if you make a mistake, try to do it again so that people think it's that you're trying to do it.
That's the definition of jazz, I think. So I've read.
I do that all the time. I try to repeat my mistakes just make them see think I was really trying to do that.
Right.
It actually works. It actually
Yeah.
works a lot of the time.
Well, I thought the key to mistakes is not to show any facial expression, like surprise or like, oh, ooh.
Yeah, right. Right.
I actually teach my students to smile when they make mistakes. Yeah, I've had to teach myself that same thing.
Yeah, that is a winner too. That's a winner.
Yeah.
But that's not about the most important thing for dancing.
But it kind of is, right? That it's partly that spirit of like, have fun with it, right? And
Right.
welcome those opportunities when they come. I think smiling through a mistake is deeper than it sounds, right? Because it means that you're like open to it when it happens.
Yeah. And also you're not beating yourself up because it's really not that important.
And the audience doesn't want to see that.
No.
Yeah.
Right. But I often get piano students, actually agno students, and I haven't for a number of years now, but pianists who have been playing for a while, and they have a lot of technique, but so often, sadly, they just don't have the basic feel, the rhythm. So they can do all this fancy stuff with their right and left hands, but they don't have that basic rhythm. And it's not even just a matter of precise time. It's a way of propelling the rhythm along with your backup playing. And I don't know what it is. Maybe it's playing on a slight leading edge of the beat as opposed to some other styles of music. I'm not sure. But that feel, that rhythmic feel, is often what the next wannabe students are lacking. And it's often why a classical musician who probably has 100 times my technique will still not, often be a not very good dance musician. It's interesting.
Right. And it's actually when I think of a piano player beginning, I think of Bob McQuillan as the beginning, because like that's the root, and it's almost like if you take the tunes and kind of think of the tunes as like the Bob McQuillan kind of tune, just kind of like rough and ready tune, that instills the beat, and then you can get more complicated.
Right.
But you're right, when a student comes at you and they're really great and they can play the heck out of their instrument, sometimes it's really hard to strip them down into like really being rooted.
I usually appreciate it.
Well, I'll say it's been a real blessing to be active in the contra scene all along, of course, but especially during the time that the last 20 years or so, where I have been engaged in some pretty active teaching and mentoring, which is a broad definition that's kind of, just like it's kind of a wide thing. But anyway, to be able to find the opportunities to bring some of the more motivated kids who really seemed like they were aware of dancing and they were aware of instinctively how much fun it was going to be to actually be up there on the stage the way we all know, including a lot of you in the Zoom hang here, slash audience. It's just nothing like it. It's just, it's the catbird seat. And to be able to watch these kids get up there and, they're not ready to be soloists or anything like that, but to just play along with the band. And we all had that opportunity, like Kate, you get up here. So it's, sort of like I'm eliminating the bark from the stage, and just like I bring them to the stage and I set them up. And of course we're talking about pre-COVID, but it's just been so rewarding. And then the payoff is that kids see other kids doing it and they're like, oh, that's pretty cool. I want to do that. When's my
Also
turn?
in Maine, Steve Muse has this amazing group of fiddlers. They
Oh,
do
Steve, geez.
Yeah, they do the coolest stuff, and they're
That's
so
crazy.
great.
That guy is nuts, but yeah, it's great in a good way.
So I want to tell a little story that happened quite a while ago. I was hired to play for a group of campers at Sergeant Camp in Hancock, New Hampshire, years ago when Elvie, my daughter, was a young teenager. And I was just getting her hired into playing for some of these low-key dance situations and make some money, you know. And she had been taking quite a bit of piano lessons and was attending Apple Hill Chamber music sessions over in Nelson. And as part of being part of that Apple Hill thing, she was, as a piano player, asked to play 2 or 3 really difficult pieces for other lead instruments. So piano backup for concertos and that kind of stuff. And there was a considerable amount of pressure on her to perform at a high level in public on 2 or 3 pieces. And what she said directly after one of those performances, she said to me something like, you know, I just love playing for dancing where people are moving to my music. It just feels so free and spirited. And she was comparing that to the pressure and the high classical events that were happening. And I just think that sort of captures it for a lot of us, or at least for me too, is that freedom of just getting out on stage and people are dancing away and you're sort of making it happen. And the dancers aren't totally focused on the musicians, because I've been at events and gone into the bathroom at intermission and somebody will say, wow, you like the dancing? And I was like, I'm on stage playing music. Oh, so they don't really hear much. And that means that the pressure is lowered for the musicians because it's a social scene and they're interacting, getting dance partners lined up and dancing and focusing on how to dance, you know. So it's a great venue for just getting chops down and playing freely, you know. And Elvie has continued to play for folk dancing. She now lives in Ireland, but
how many of us have gone to the restroom during the break and then been asked to dance while we're on our way back out to the stage, you know? And I'm like, it's so great, because you're like, oh, this isn't really about me. Great. I don't care if you notice me being on stage or not. You go have a fun time. I'm sorry I can't dance with you. You know, once in a while you can like duck out for a waltz and leave your bandmates to it. Or I've known people to like dance up the line, book a partner for a tiny part of the dance up the line, and then just go up on stage and jump in with your bandmates. That's also fun to do. Sorry, Kate, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say the classic thing is you go out to mooch off the refreshment table or something. And of course people say, hey, you want to dance the next dance? And you say, no, with the band. And then I always get, really? What are you playing? What instrument are you playing? You may find that liberating. I find it slightly demoralizing, but...
But, you know, it's like some of these things are so obvious when we're talking about what dance music it is and how we learn it, that it seems silly to talk about them. But to kind of answer that question a little bit more, like, it's dance music when it feels like dance music, right? You just know it when you feel it. It's about the rhythm and the lift and the tempo and the energy. And then some of the sound also sounds like dance music. That has a little more variety to it, right? Doesn't all sound like New England tunes these days. You could hear a Breton tune or bombard or a subwoofer and a drum beat or looping or whatever. But also the fact that it responds to the dancers in real time, I think, is also the really essential thing about dance music.
That's exactly what I was thinking when I was hearing Rodney talk, is just that the dancers are actually part of the band in a way, that their feet movement, one of the things that has been hard about being in the pandemic is that you don't have that visceral feeling of rhythm that's coming from the floor that you do at a dance. So it's like you're missing part of your band.
Yeah, I heard this great tip from Todd Whittemore once. I said, Todd, how do you know when we're playing too fast? And he says, I listen for a balance, and if the balance in the hall sounds like a gunshot, just right on the money, you're doing fine. And if it's scattered, there's probably something wrong with the rhythm.
Yeah, that's a great advice.
Yeah.
So I think, as we think about teaching new generations of folks, it's partly just giving them the freedom to play with it and learn and have fun with it, right? But also, how can we as a community do a good job of creating spaces? Like when I was a new musician in Boston, I actually found it really hard to find a place to play because the dances at the Scout House were amazing, but all the musicians were really great and bands from all over the country, but they didn't allow sit-ins there. And I used to drive out to Greenfield and go to David Kaner's dance and sit on stage and noodle along badly on my penny whistle. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. And there was a dance at MIT that was welcoming to sit-ins. And so that's where I learned how to play. And that's where I met my bandmates in Nor'easter. And I bet all of you have had experiences like that. And there's events like giant open bands like at NEFA or other places, the festival orchestras where people get a taste of playing in an open band or something like that for the first time. What are some of your spaces, your favorite spaces like that? And how can we cultivate more of these opportunities for people?
Well, I think you just answered your own question. Because the sit-ins I certainly made use of David Kaner's sit-in contra dances myself early on, and that was huge. It was a huge thing to have a place to go. And I feel like there's other places now that are being developed, like the fiddle orchestras, the ones that, again, another David Kaner thing. There's the fiddle orchestra in Western Mass and the one in Montpelier where people of all ages can play. And then there's the young mentoring situations that like Pete is part of or has been part of. So I think there's tiered things. I think, just making sure that those things continue to happen is an important thing.
Yeah, sadly, open bands used to be, I think, more the norm, and now they're very much the exception.
Right.
Which has got to be at least partly an outgrowth of the proliferation of at least wannabe professional bands, part-time bands and stuff, which, maybe COVID is just a reset button to that whole thing, and maybe we'll come out the other end back into dancing, and open bands will suddenly be more of the norm again or accepted. And of course, we all have the power, if we believe that's a good thing, to make that happen.
Right, to make spaces for people to join.
Absolutely.
And, yeah. And there's also that, as you say, that feeling of, well, then you get this spark. Well, I want to, what can I create in a smaller setting, with these, this group of people,
That's where bands come from.
That's where bands come from, right?
That's
Exactly.
Oh my God, totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important for us as a community to make sure that we have all sorts of different kinds of spaces, because we are now in an era of contra dance music that's dominated by bands at a lot of events, especially dance weekends. You have to be a band. You have to have a lot of repertoire. You have to be practiced. You have to be good. You have to and the dancers partly drive what contra musicians need to do to get booked. And there are some excellent musicians and bands who don't get booked for dance weekends because they don't necessarily, and callers, because they don't necessarily fit the model of what contra dancers want or what organizers want. Organizers are also trying to sell their dances often to the same people who are flying to the same weekends. And so that's all great. I'm not I love our national dance scene and traveling, but we also have to somehow preserve these spaces where people can learn and where we're welcoming to new people. And I hope it's not ever, I think sometimes the dancers don't want to hear open bands, or if you have someone sitting in and you're not playing your normal repertoire for the evening. And I know this is a little controversial, but I just hope that we can kind of keep these spaces and kind of encourage the dancers to be like, we are all creating this experience for each other, and let's all have fun with it. It's not an experience that we're curating for your entertainment like you pay money to see a movie in the same way. It's like a living community.
I think that there's a lot of places where open bands happen, where people are really proud of their open band and excited to be part of it. I think of the mega band out in Oregon. Like I think that there's definitely places where that it's like an event, and people are happy to be part of that event and go to it. Maybe it's in our selling of it.
I wonder if I could quote a theory, which is, it seems to me, from my aging perspective, when I started to dance, dancing was very much a community and social experiment. And then a while later, maybe 10 or 15 years later, the focus really on the dancing itself and good dancing, and people really wanted to dance with other good dancers, and bands started to refine their sound. But I know when I started dancing, it was often to Dudley's open bands, and I just thought they were awesome, and I loved that music, and I loved the spirit of that massive sound. And I wonder if it's just a change of taste, which, everything changes, and maybe someday we'll get back to that feeling of just enjoying this massive band playing the tune all at once. I still think that's kind of magical. If there was a person there, I don't know what it was. Go ahead.
Well, hence your leading of the festival orchestra.
Yeah.
You keep it going.
Yeah, to me, it's like having been part of some bands that really kind of pushed various envelopes, and several of us have been there. But it's like it's an antidote, again, sort of a reset button. It's like, let's get back to basics and just feel the power, as Kate said, of the massive take on a great melody. Arguably a great melody. It's been around a long time. It must be great. And people are still playing it. And it must really turn dancers on. In fact,
right.
It sure does. So
right.
That's a well always worth going back to for another drink.
All right, I have a question for my compatriots. What makes a good gig? I'll start. For me, a gig has to have any one of three things. It has to be good, interesting musical experience, or has to pay really well. I'm not going to hold up my middle finger. Or it has to be a great social experience. Like a lot of my friends, which is often why playing for a benefit is great. Even if I don't get paid, it's like there's a looseness, and my friends are there, and gigs with huge amounts of money. I'm always open to that. But also, sometimes gigs are say, "Wow, I've never played with this person," or I'm learning this new style, and this is a chance to try that out. So for me, any of those elements makes for a great gig, along with a room with a private door when you travel. not sleeping on the sofa.
No cats in your bedroom either.
Oh no, I like the cats.
Oh, okay.
All right, Pete, you're next.
Let's see, great gig. Yeah, and more than half my life has been not dance. It's band, not the bandstand for a dance. It's been concert kind of stuff too. So two realities kind of in my brain that are probably a slightly different take on the question. But for dancing, I think that people are just like, they're having fun. They're smiling a lot. Some kind of engagement referencing the conversation earlier about getting asked to dance when you go to the bathroom or whatever, like they don't know you from anybody. So some kind of connection so that, you don't have to be like a rock star, but like they actually recognize that you're one of the people up there on the stage creating this good time. So if there's a little bit of that, I'm pretty happy. And a good reception to, if you work hard on your sets and your, some of your arrangements and stuff like that, getting a really good reception to that, and having people ask about it later. It's nothing but satisfying.
Becky?
Well, I'm thinking about everything that you're saying, and I'm connecting to all of it, but it seems so long ago. And I'm thinking about my criteria for a good gig now, and it's so different. It's it's outside, and preferably there's something beautiful nearby. I can see beauty, and yes, there are friends, like there's people that I'm connecting to, but and preferably some little interest, like maybe there's children dancing, or maybe some of the people actually get up and move around a little bit or boogie off in the corners of the lawn or something. Anyway, I was just thinking how my whole criteria has changed.
Rodney.
Real people, please.
Yeah.
Well, I think one of the beautiful things of having a band and traveling to a gig, playing a weekend or a week somewhere, is that you have the camaraderie of your band members. And usually that's the band put together because you all pretty much get along together, and you're on the gig and you're playing the heck out of the music, and people in the band are responding with amazing stuff. Like, I didn't know you could do that. And this is what keeps it alive for me anyway, is the development of the music to a deeper level. And when it really works with the dancing and you're playing at top response between the band members, there's nothing better. It's like, I want to do this again. I want to do it again. Where's the next gig? And that's so important, because I think some people get put in circumstances, like if you're always going to play with a mega band for your career, then where's it's the beauty of the sound, but where's the personal development in there? Because it's like playing in an orchestra. You contribute to the whole, but are you expressing yourself? And if you're expressing yourself, then that drives you forward. It makes you want to learn more music, more tunes, get more gigs, take it for a ride. So.
Yeah, and a lot of new tunes are written when you're like in the car or backstage or noodling around with your bandmates, and it's all kind of part of that experience together. So like as a flip side, bands have also been such a huge part of the flourishing of all these different sounds of contra dance music, like these amazing bands, Latter Day Lizards and Nightingale, and, the Stingrays and the Posse, and so many great bands. And you get this amazing rhythm lock when you play with people for a long time. And in a way, it's like driving a race car at that point, because you can really just focus on the dancers at that point, once you've all figured out what you're doing with each other and how to play off each other. And so, the professionalization of contra dance music has changed a lot of it, but it's also allowed bands to get to this level and this kind of dance like nirvana, which is what a lot of people who travel for dances are looking for, is that incredible euphoric feeling of all being connected, which is what the whole point of the dance is, right? The moment when everything dissolves and everyone is just together, the caller and the dancers and musicians all moving as one. And so I've been grateful for the people who are crazy enough to fly me around and let me play dances all the time, because one of the best ways to learn is just do something a whole bunch of times and mess up a lot, right? And having that opportunity to mess up with really good company, especially who are often better than you, which is another tip, is to mess up with good people. That's the best way to learn.
I saw the comment go by, and I actually, Dave Morris, Dave Marcus, wherever you are, about always be, but well, he said rather cynically, make sure you're the worst person in the band, meaning that's how you're going to learn the most. I was definitely that person in the Clayfoot Strutters in my own mind anyway, but I learned so much from some really incredible people, and so there's a more benign version of that could become conventional wisdom if you're a teacher. It's like always look for opportunities to play with somebody that's better than you. Always. Never pass it up.
So there's also been this flourishing of original tunes and compositions. And, sadly, I don't think we had time to really delve into this a lot. But, there's a question about what inspired you to compose tunes. I think for some of us, it just sort of happens, right? You're around tunes, you start thinking and they come out of your fingers. But do you have any fun stories you want to share about that before we wrap up? Too open-ended a question.
Well, every fiddle tune was written by somebody.
Right? Even the quote-unquote traditional
tunes.
ones, right? They're all original.
Yeah.
I'm going to get my charger. I'll be right back.
Okay. Well, I feel like I'm the least experienced writer here, but and I have been around some really amazing writers all my musical life. But it was actually Anne Percival's artwork that pushed me into writing tunes, because she was doing this process art where she would take her art and put it under the bed when she was done with it. And it was all about the process, and then it went under the bed, and she wasn't supposed to look at it when she was done. And so I thought, I can do that. And so I wrote tunes, and I'd write tunes, I thought of tunes, and then I just turned the page, and that tune was done. And it was a while before there was a tune that I was happy with, but it was sort of that feeling that, there's something there. It doesn't have to be a Keith Murphy or a Jeremiah McLean tune right off the bat, because if you're going to judge your tunes when when you first form them, you have to be a beginner at everything. So anyway, put them under the bed for a while. Everybody has tunes in them.
Yeah, and it's the question of like process versus product, right? And if you're making a studio album, it's about the product, but dance music, I feel like, is about the process. It's about the moment. And a lot of bands make albums, but we know that the magic isn't always in the Contra Dance albums. It's actually really hard to capture that energy in the studio, right? And if you think about tunesmithing as that kind of process, of course, we don't have to write new tunes. And you could argue, as like Bill adding in the comments, that Newt Tolman famously despised the idea of writing new tunes. We also already have lots of great tunes that already exist, right? They've stood the test of time, and they're amazing. And we have to keep that balance of like having a common repertoire as a community, because the other magical thing about Contra Dance music is that any musician could sit down with any other musician and find something to play. And you don't even know each other's names, and you jam in the hallway at NEFA for 3 hours or whatever it is, or late night somewhere, and you become best friends. And, if we have all original compositions where every band has its own repertoire, then we'll lose that. So it's like keeping that commonality of these like wonderful workhorse tunes and not losing those at the same time.
One of the things I've found very helpful in writing tunes is like when I was starting playing for dances originally, I played it pretty much straightforward. So it was like 2 tunes 12 or 14 times through, instead of like the Chestnuts, which was 1 tune 14 times through, which can be a little tedious and hard to do over and over and over. So I was like challenging myself to take the tune and make it a little different each time or whatever, but that led to an improvisational freedom for me of staying rooted with the tune so you can tell what the tune is, but then explore it, like take a different path, but say the kind of the same statement that the tune was trying to say. And each time you do that, then the improv segment actually could be a new tune because it's different. And so that leads to writing tunes like you played a lick during a dance. You said, wow, I don't remember any other tunes where that lick appeared. I'll write a tune based on the lick. So it sort of like is this motor driven thing.
Yeah, I see it as a continuum from playing the tune as it's written, all the way through coming up with a harmony, then coming up with a numb improvisation, and then suddenly you're a new tune tape.
I've probably learned the most recently probably during the Posse years with my longtime musical partner Oliver Scanlon, who is similarly interested in the co-writing part, and that's either something you can come to organically and fairly painlessly, or it's just terrifying because it's all about trust. The process part is all about trust, and you really need a longtime collaborator that you've kind of been through some fire with in order to kind of settle that question and just get down to like really having a brain meld and having that work. So in every single instance of co-writing, whatever the actual route to the finish line is in terms of who provided what, I come away feeling like I grew some as a writer myself. Like I could go back and approach the next thing I want to try to codify in terms of a fresh idea in a slightly different way as a result of that process. So I just kind of want to put in a pitch for that too.
It's the next terrifying frontier.
Even if the tunes are no damn good at all, it's still worth doing.
I wish we could talk about this all night. We were joking that there should be an after party where we just keep geeking out about all this stuff. But I want to ask all of you, it's just been so wonderful to hear some of your thoughts. And are there any last thoughts about, mentoring or teaching or anything, dance music that you want to leave with us tonight? Anything you want to add besides everything that we haven't talked about yet? And there's been a really great sidebar in the chat, by the way, too, which I'm really enjoying. Feel free to keep chatting over there, everybody. Sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I'll end with a story. I've been at this a really long time, and unlike some of my fellow players, sometimes I like it, and sometimes I'm really burnt out on it. And a while ago, I was wondering, why am I doing this? I'm poor. I have to get on an airplane, which I hate. But here's what happens is I get to a dance and like this guy will come in who's been busting his ass at some job all week. He's tired. And then as soon as we start playing, he stands up and he's moving around. He's jiving. He's forgotten everything. He's happy. And I thought, damn, that is good work. If our band can do that for people, make them forget and just celebrate life and rhythm, just right in the moment, that is magic. And that's why I do it.
You're here.
Yep, you said it.
Yep.
I've been playing music for, decades. And to me, music is still magic. And I don't understand how it reaches people the way it does in such a magical way.
And keeping that newness and freshness and freedom is such an important part of it. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to turn it over to Joanna, who I think wants to say a few closing thoughts with us. But I just want to thank you all so much for being here and sharing some of your thoughts. And it's just so great to see your faces, too. And all of you out there, it's so nice to see you. And, every Contra Pulse episode, we always end with like, where do you think country music is going to go in the future? And the fun thing is we don't know, but we know probably will still remain the thing that we love, whatever happens with it. But just realizing the roots of this tradition are very deep. And even though it's dormant right now, the roots are still there, and it's going to come back with a vengeance when this is all over. And I can't wait to see how things are different when we can finally all get back and dance and write. And what kind of outpouring of energy is this going to be when we can finally be fully back and doing things, whatever that looks like.
Here, here.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you
Thanks,
to
Julie.
our whole panel for joining us and for staying up so late. There's always so much more to talk about and so much more for all of us to learn. So hopefully, Julie, we can entice you back onto Common Time some other time so we can learn more about your work and from everybody. I'm just going to share a slide about some other events that are coming up on the CDSS front in the next few months. So hopefully you can see that slide on your screen. So we have several things coming up on November 1st, which is a Monday, is our next web chat. And it's called Weathering the Winter Together. We're still in the throes of this pandemic, unfortunately. So hopefully we can come together, get some status updates about what's happening in the wider world of public health, and brainstorm for ideas about how groups are staying together. Some groups are beginning to gather again. Some groups are just keeping on Zoom. Some groups are doing a hybrid. So let's share some stories and figure out how we can get through these next several months. On this program, Common Time next month, we have Mary Devlin, who's a caller from the Portland, Oregon area, and she is an NLP practitioner. That's neuro-linguistic programming, and she's going to talk about how she uses NLP techniques as part of calling and how we can all learn from that. And we'll send out an email about that probably sometime this week. And we have more Contra Pulse episodes coming out. Julie, who is your next interview for Contra Pulse? Can you share any advance information with us?
Yes, it's very timely. Sue Songer is coming up next. And actually, we talked quite a bit about the Portland Mega Band. So this is a very timely conversation. And also, you know, the Portland collections and how they're an important part of mentoring as well. We talked to, someone mentioned like kind of one-way mentoring where you're just soaking everything up and the other person doesn't even know they've taught you. And I feel like the Portland collections have done that for so many people. So it was really wonderful to chat with Sue.
Great. We'll look forward to that. And Sue has been on this program tonight. And as Ben mentioned at the top of this program, we'll be sending you a follow-up email. We'd love to get your thoughts about this program and any ideas about what you'd like to see on future Common Time episodes. So we'll send you a brief little survey, and we will let you know when the video recording for tonight's episode is available. So stay tuned for that as well. And with that, thank you all so much for coming. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Becky. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Rodney. Thank you, Pete. It's been great having you on this evening.